Welcome to Notes from the Edge, where we have the conversations we should have been having all along. We talk about the things that we're not talking about. I'm your host, Lisa Lacey, writer, trauma educator, executive advisor, and author of the upcoming memoir, Notes from a Certified Madwoman. Welcome to the Edge. The belief that love will eventually hurt. The feeling that peace cannot be trusted. The compulsion to scan every face, every room, every change in someone's voice, looking for the moment safety disappears. But what happens when the fear you are carrying did not begin with you? What happens when your nervous system is responding to a story that began decades before your birth? And what happens when you finally decide that although it did not start with you, it is not going any further? Today we are talking about generational trauma. We are talking about Mark Wallen's book, It Didn't Start With You. We are talking about mice, cherry blossoms, family silence, murdered women, and the terrible things that can become family heirlooms when nobody has language or safety to process them. I am going to tell you about my grandmother. Her name was Cletha C. Langley. She was 30 years old. She was a mother of 6. And on August 9th, 1969, she was beaten to death outside of her home. For most of my life, her story existed more like a shadow than a complete human life. And today, I want to bring her out of the shadow. Today, I want to say her name. Today, I want to give her more than a few inches of newspaper ink the world gave her. Because Cletha's death did not only happen to her, it moved through my mother, into me, and it shaped the work I now do with women who are learning sometimes for the first time that their bodies belong to them and they have choice. This is a story about what families inherit. But most importantly, it is a story about what families can choose not to pass on. Welcome to the Edge. There are things we carry without knowing why. There are certain reactions I have carried that have sometimes felt bigger than the moment in front of me. A raised voice can feel like an emergency. A sudden shift in someone's mood can become somebody's body believes it must immediately be solved. Uncertainty can feel dangerous. Abandonment can feel less like a painful possibility and more like an approaching extinction event. For years, I interpreted those responses as evidence that something was wrong with me, that I was defective, too emotional, intense, sensitive, reactive, too much. You are too much. That particular phrase has followed so many traumatized women throughout their lives. But what if the response is not too much? What if the response makes perfect sense when you place it inside the full history of the family? That is one of the questions underneath Mark Wallen's work. His book is called It Didn't Start With You, How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How to End the Cycle. The premise is not that every fear belongs to a dead relative. It is that your ancestors are secretly operating your nervous system from the great beyond. It is not an invitation to blame your family for everything that has gone wrong in your life. It is an invitation to widen the frame and change your perspective. And instead of asking what happened to me, we can also ask what happened around me, what happened to the people who raised me, why did they have to become in order to survive? What could they never talk about? What was silenced? What losses were never grieved? What violence was normalized? What family member disappeared from the story? And what sentence keeps repeating through the generations? Maybe that sentence is men cannot be trusted, Women must tolerate pain. Don't make anyone angry. Do not embarrass the family. Keep the peace. Stay small. Do not tell. Love means sacrifice. You cannot survive alone, or maybe the sentence is even simpler. Something terrible is always about to happen. When a sentence like that lives inside of us long enough, we stop hearing it as a sentence and it becomes our reality. It becomes our identity. Generational trauma can be transmitted in more than one way. It can move through the stories families tell. It can move through the stories families refuse to tell. It can move through attachment. A frightened parent can love a child deeply and still have difficulty creating emotional safety because their own body never learned what safety felt like. They can move through behavior. Children notice what makes adults freeze, panic, rage, withdraw, control, drink, disappear, or become emotionally unreachable. Children are so smart. It can move through family roles. One child is the caretaker, one the peacekeeper, one becomes invisible while one becomes perfect, and one becomes the problem, so nobody has to look at the actual problem. It can move through poverty and racism and displacement and war and institutionalization, addiction, domestic violence, incarceration, and the ongoing conditions surrounding the original trauma. And researchers have also investigated whether some effects of stress might be transmitted biologically through changes in how genes are regulated. This is where we begin to talk about epigenetics. Your genetic sequence is not simply rewritten by every frightening thing that happens to you. Epigenetics refers more broadly to processes that influence how genes are expressed without changing the underlying DNA sequence. This area of research is so fascinating. It is also frequently oversimplified on social media. Human beings are not laboratory mice. Families have language and culture and secrets and rituals, housing, religion, addiction, money, relationships, and generations of people telling children what they are and are not allowed to know or decide. So we notice a pattern moving through a human family. You cannot automatically declare that it was passed through DNA. It may have been. It may have also moved through pregnancy, attachment, caregiving, modeling, poverty, silence, family expectations, or all of those working together. I do not need the science to be exaggerated for generational trauma to be real. Biology may be one road, but family silence, that's a whole nother path. There is a study that gets discussed frequently in conversations about inherited trauma. People sometimes call it the rat and cherry blossom study. It was actually conducted with mice. Researchers Brian Diaz and Carrie Ressler exposed male mice to an odor commonly described as similar to cherry blossoms or the smell of almonds. And so what happened was whenever the mice smelled it, they received a mild electric shock. Well, eventually, they learned to associate that particular scent with danger. If they smell it, they get shocked, so they didn't want it. As smell appears, pain follows, the nervous system learns. The smell means something bad is coming. Then the researchers bred those male mice, and their offspring had never been conditioned or shocked. They had never been trained to fear the odor. They had not watched their fathers being shocked, yet the offspring demonstrated increased sensitivity to the same smell. And the researchers also observed changes involving the nose and difference in the methylation processes associated with the relevant scent receptors. In other words, the mice, the offspring, adapted genetically. Now, this is where we have to stay intellectually honest. The mice did not inherit a movie of what happened to their fathers. They did not awaken with a detailed memory of laboratory electric shocks or scientists holding a clipboard. The study suggests that ancestral experiences may have influence on later generations. how they respond to specific environmental clues, and that is extraordinary. But it is not the same as proving that human beings inherit complete traumatic memories through their genes. The research has also faced many questions and debate. Human evidence is much more difficult to interpret because we cannot separate biology from family environment, culture, pregnancy, parenting, social conditionings in the way researchers attempt to with animals. But still, I think about those mice. A scent entered the room. Their bodies reacted to something that had never happened to them, the little babies. And although I do not believe we should turn one study into an entire theology, I understand the metaphor. Where are the cherry blossoms in your family? What entered the room and caused your body to prepare for an old danger? Was it the sound of a man's anger? The possibility of abandonment or financial instability, or a woman refusing to remain quiet, or was it simply love itself? Because in some families, love and danger become so closely paired that the nervous system stops knowing the difference. My grandmother's name was Cletha C. Langley. She was 30 years old. She had 6 children. My mother was 12. She lived in California, a small community outside of Modesto. She was poor. She lived on what people considered the bad side of town, and in the way society has treated poor women throughout history, she was not considered important enough for the world to stop for her murder. On August 9th, 1969, Cletha was beaten to death by her husband. This was the same date the Tate murders, the Manson murders, became national news, part of the killings that would make Charles Manson infamous. I cannot prove that the national attention surrounding those crimes caused my grandmother's case to disappear, but I know whose name history remembers and whose name got totally forgotten. The closest thing my grandmother received to obituary was this newspaper clipping. And the headline reads, "Mother of 6 found slain. Modesto, a 30-year-old mother of 6 children, was found savagely beaten to death Saturday in the front yard of her home, a small community 8 miles outside of Modesto." Sheriff's deputies said that the body of Cletha C. Langley was discovered by a passing farmer. All her children were asleep in the house, and when awakened said they knew nothing of the incident. The victim's car was found about a block from her home. Deputies theorized the victim apparently tried to escape her assailant, but he ran alongside the car, hitting her and pulling large clumps of her hair out of her head. He then apparently knocked her unconscious and dragged her back to the front yard. That is it. That is all she got. The closest thing to an obituary. There was no paragraph about who she was before she became the victim, not about what made her laugh or any music she loved or how she danced in the kitchen or played volleyball with the kids outside. Nothing about what she wanted to become before survival swallowed all of her choices. Nothing about the sound of her voice. Nothing about her dreams. She was reduced to 30 years old, mother of 6 found slain. Her children were inside the house, and my mother was just 12. One night she had a mother, and then she simply did not. The man that killed her never saw a day in court. He had beaten her so badly that she was unrecognizable, yet the death certificate my family received was closed as natural causes. Natural causes, I cannot make that make sense. There was no trial, no courtroom, no formal reckoning, no justice. The man my family holds responsible went on living. He lived to be 74. He had other families. He had decades, and my grandmother got inches of a newspaper. And because she was poor, because she was a woman, because she lived where she lived, and because the world was busy looking somewhere else, her death became another story that would be closed, filed, and forgotten. But families do not forget simply because institutions stop recording. The body always remembers what the paperwork erases. Cletha's death did not remain in 1969. My mother was 12 when she lost her own, and she gave birth to me shortly after, a child raising a child. A girl whose own childhood had been torn open was suddenly responsible for helping another human feel safe. I have compassion for that now in a way I could not have when I was younger. My mother did not receive any therapy. She did not receive nervous system education. Nobody sat beside her and explained that grief can appear as rage, control, numbness, fear, emotional unpredictability, or the inability to tolerate separation. Nobody explained that the loss of a mother through violence can alter how a girl understands love, danger, women, men, protection, and her own worth. She survived, and then she raised me from inside that survival. That is not blame. That is the context of my existence. I did not only inherit my mother's DNA, I inherited the emotional climate surrounding her. The things she feared, the things she silenced, the things she could not name. I inherited lessons about love and pain that had never been consciously taught, and I learned to read a room early. I learned to anticipate emotional weather. I learned how to stay ready for the fight, how to perform competence even when my inner world was collapsing. I became successful. I built businesses. I led people. I made a ton of money. I solved problems. I kept going. And because the world rewards high functioning survival, many of those patterns looked like strength. Hypervigilance looked like intuition. Overfunctioning looked like leadership, and self abandonment, well, that looked like loyalty. Emotional suppression, that looked like professionalism. And enduring the unbearable looked like resilience, and competence became camouflage. But underneath it, there was a nervous system trying to make certain that what happened to the women before me would never happen again. For much of my life, I carried a fear of abandonment, difficulty trusting, and a belief that love and pain were somehow intertwined. I accepted too little. I gave too much. I tolerated things I never should have tolerated, and I mistook familiar pain for connection. Because our nervous system does not always choose what is safe. Sometimes it chooses what it sees and recognizes as familiar. My grandmother's story ended in violence. My mother's story was shaped by survival. And my story could have easily gone another chapter in the same tragedy. And it almost did. But my story was still being written. People speak about cycle breaking as though it's a single brave decision. You announce, this ends with me, then the ancestors applause, the nervous system settles, and everyone goes for brunch. Well, that's not how it works. It's repetitive, it's inconvenient, and it's lonely. It means noticing the pattern after you have done the thing, then noticing it earlier next time, then eventually recognizing it before it controls the decision. It means learning that compassion for your family does not require continued access to harm. My energy is a privilege and not everybody gets access to it. It means understanding why people became who they became without pretending their behavior did not affect me. It means grieving my parents, my grandparents, because I never had them. It means becoming the safe adult your younger self spent years searching for. It means learning boundaries after generations of women were taught that survival depended on appeasement, tolerating the guilt that sometimes appears when you stop participating in the family's version of normal, and allowing people to misunderstand you. A lot of people, including your family. And it means refusing to keep secret merely because the secret makes someone else more comfortable. It means recognizing that you are not betraying your family by telling the truth. Telling the truth is the first genuinely loving thing anyone has done for the family in generations. A cycle breaker does not mean I hate the people who came before me. It means I refuse to let their pain keep making decisions through me. It means I can say the fear may have entered the family before I was born, but I am responsible for what I do with it now. And I can honor survival intelligence that got us here without forcing another generation to live inside of it. And that is the difference between inheritance and destiny. You may inherit a pattern. You are not required to build your entire life around it. I never got the opportunity to know my grandmother as a living woman. I know her now in spirit. I know her in fragments, photographs, newspaper clippings, family stories, and a lot of silence. The shape of the wound she left behind. But I also know her through the work that grew from that wound. Cletha, you are the reason I teach trauma-informed martial arts in domestic violence shelters. And I cannot help but believe that if you had been given the skills I have today, you might still be here with us. Maybe you would have known how to create distance or protect your head or escape the grip or use your voice or recognize the moment the danger was escalating or trust your instinct telling you to run, run, run. Maybe somebody would have taught you that you were allowed to fight for your own life. I cannot go backwards and give those skills to you now. So I pass them forward. I teach them to other women so they do not suffer the same fate. I teach women that their bodies belong to them. They are allowed to take up space. They are allowed to say no. Freezing is not weakness. Surviving is not consent, and protection can be learned. Their bodies are not the enemy, and their lives are worth defending to the death. Every woman who reconnects with her body carries a piece of your legacy forward. Every woman who learns to protect herself answers the silence that surrounded your death. And every woman who leaves believing she is worth saving gives your story a different ending. Your legacy lives in me, not just in the fear, grief, or violence, but the women who continued, the women who learn, and the women who now reach backwards through time and say, you deserved better, you deserved protection, you deserved justice, you deserved an obituary that said more than how brutally you died. You deserved to be remembered for how you lived. Maybe generational trauma is partly biological. Maybe some of it travels through gene expression and chemistry of stress. Maybe it travels through a frightened mother's nervous system as she raises a frightened child. And maybe it travels through silence and poverty and family roles and the things children witness. And the things children are told were not that bad or never happen, or the stories that are whispered, or the names that just disappear. It travels through many roads at once. But here's what I know. What happened before us can shape us without owning us. We can look backwards without living backwards. We can honor the people who survived without continuing every survival pattern they handed to us. We can stop calling inherited fear our personality, our identity. We can stop confusing hypervigilance with intuition, appeasement with love, and suffering with loyalty. And we can teach our bodies that the danger is no longer happening. We are safe. We can give language to what previous generations could only feel, maybe. And we can restore the names of the people history reduced to victims. Her name was Cletha C. Langley. She was 30 years old, mother of 6, and she was more than the violence that ended her life. She was more than a newspaper clipping. She was more than mother of 6 found slain. She was my grandmother. It did not start with me. It did not start with my mother. It didn't even start with Cletha, but it ends here. So I leave you with these questions tonight. What are you carrying that didn't start with you? What have you been performing in order to survive? And what are you willing to change so that survival does not become the next generation's inheritance? I'm Lisa Lacey. This is Notes from the Edge, where we have the damn conversations we should have been having all along. Thank you for remembering Cletha with me. And thank you, Grandma, for being here tonight. See you at the edge.